Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of Debunked here on INX Prime. Well, there's one story that's dominating headlines, and that is the situation between Iran and Israel at the moment. So we're going to get right into it. Let me tell you who our guests are for the program today. Dr. Mohamed Shahid Mathee, senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg. Mustafa Darsot, a community activist and a political commentator. And Basheera Soomar, a South African activist who was part of the Gaza Freedom March. Dr. Mathee, assalamu alaikum, welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for having me on your program. And assalamu alaikum to my fellow colleagues and guests on this program, and to the listeners of the INX.
Mustafa, assalamu alaikum, welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Moulana, and assalamu alaikum to the fellow panel members and the guests.
Basheera, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to you as well.
Wa alaikum salam, shukran for having me.
So Basheera, I'm going to start with you because I understand that you've got another commitment and you've got to leave us in a couple of minutes. I mean, the Gaza Freedom March, the situation in Gaza, and then now we've got this situation with Iran and Israel. Do you see a link? What are the links? What are the parallels? What's the bigger picture here in your opinion?
I mean, there's definitely a link. I think the biggest risk for Gaza at the moment is that Israel and Iran, are occupying the media coverage, whereas the death toll in Gaza over the past 24 hours was over 100 people, which is more than Israel and Iran combined. So first of all, I think that's the biggest issue, is that while the focus is on the war between Israel and Iran, it's not what we should be focusing on. It's completely distracting from the genocide in Gaza, and it's allowing Israel to act with greater impunity than they ever have done before.
I'm going to talk a little bit later about what are the actual motivations of Netanyahu here, right? But based on what you've just said, do you think one of his motivations is actually to distract from the scale of the genocide in Gaza, to turn away the focus of the world?
I definitely think that's one of the key motivations, given the fact that, thousands of people from around the world, from 80 countries around the world, were willing to march to the Rafah border, were willing to take things in their own hands because global governments and international institutions have been failing to uphold international law. I don't think it's the only motivation for attacking Iran, but I do think it's a key motivation to complete the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and to move the genocide of the Palestinian people to the next level without the world watching, because it's been distracted by the current regional instability.
What do you make of then what has happened recently, which kind of also got overshadowed from Friday when the Israeli attacks took place on Iran? And that is activists from around the world descending on Egypt and then being blocked.
I don't want to focus too much about the experiences on the activists, because it's not about us. It was never about us. We were always willing to put ourselves on the line for Gaza, and focusing on Egypt as the aggressor. Yes, they are complicit and they're normalizing the genocide, but they are not the aggressor that we need to focus on. We still need to focus on Israel. This is still about Gaza. We should not be focusing media coverage on, the activists that were detained, that were deported, that were harmed. That was always a risk we were very aware of, and it always was the likely outcome. And I think it's key that none of this detracts from our primary goal, which is to open up the humanitarian corridor, to let aid in and to end the siege.
So even though, the march could not take place, what would you say were some of the positive takeaways from the attempt?
I mean, I think the impact was still incredible. We were not naive that we thought it would be easy to get to the Rafah border. A lot of us as coordinators and organizers thought that, we might get quite close. We didn't expect it to end so prematurely. And obviously, there is widespread disappointment, but it still achieved the impact in terms of the coverage it got globally, that governments now know that citizens are willing to take matters into their own hands and they won't stand back. And we are in no way defeated. We learned so many lessons. We we know so much more now, and we will use that to remobilize. We will remobilize, and we are already talking about strategies for next. We have not been shut down, and the movement has only grown since Friday the 13th.
All right, Basheera, shukran so much for your time. We understand you've got to leave us, but we really appreciate you participating in the discussion.
Shukran for having me.
Dr. Mathee, if I can come back to that question that I, kind of touched on briefly with Basheera, and that is, what are the actual motivations of Netanyahu here behind these attacks on Iran, in your opinion?
I would agree with Basheera. I think I concur broadly with her for all the things that she mentioned, of course. And you also, in your question, Moulana, raised a question on distracting from the genocide that the Israeli enemy is committing, and its genocide on Gaza. But I think so. I contend. I think that's in place, and I think probably many people understand that. But the Israelis, as we hear, the Zionist enemy needs to rope in the Americans, the arch imperialists, of course, because it cannot carry out what it does, not only against Iran, but also in Lebanon, against Gaza, against Palestine, without American approval. And this goes back a long way ago. If we just recall the 1956 tripartite aggression that the British, the French, and the Israelis carried out against Egypt with the Suez Canal issue, Eisenhower, for example, and even though at that time the Americans were not as involved as they are today in the last 3 decades or since the 67 war in assisting the Israelis, but he could just call it off because the Israelis were simply just working with against the Nasser government, of course, at the time in 1956. And I think this is important to see that the Zionist enemy is part of a larger project. Perhaps this is what I want to add, that we should not overlook that. And the grand imperial aim here to control the whole region. So yes, it is to do all that, but it's to do more. That American hegemony wants to now take over. And we've heard this since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. It is to divide the region and is to establish the hegemony. And perhaps to end off and to say, because Israel is a colonial state and it's in the service of the colonial powers. So Netanyahu is not just acting here by himself. People like Abdul Wahab al-Masiri, the Egyptian scholars, have written extensively on Israel. For example, one of his writings is from functional Jewish communities to a functional Zionist state. It is carrying out the function, in other words, for the imperial agenda, the imperialist and the colonial, the Western white hegemonic agenda. So we just see that Israel is serving, and the Western world needs Israel. Let's just go, and I'll end off with this to say that this is what Theo Herzl already stated at the end of the 19th century when he said, we should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. The barbarism, of course, of the Arabs, of the Muslims, to serve the civilization, the Western civilization. So yes, I all that is true, but it is part that we should always keep in mind of the grand Western imperialist agenda to keep controlling the world.
So, Mustafa, I mean, many have spoken, right, and will continue to speak about the double standards. Israel can have nukes, but Iran shouldn't. Israel doesn't have to sign treaties, Iran has to. Israel doesn't have to allow in inspectors, and the list will go on and on and on. Do you think, though, that the broader citizenry of the world are starting to wake up to these double standards? We know the global political actors kind of just fall in line, and it's the same narrative. Israel has the right to defend itself, and it has the right to preemptively strike in terms of self-defense. But do you get a sense now, with 20 months into this genocide, and now these attacks taking place, and the assassinations prior to this of Ismail Haniyeh and Hassan Nasrallah, that globally now this could backfire on these colonial imperial powers, where the narrative could change significantly? Mustafa?
At the background that Moulana, can you hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, if you look at the background that I've put up here, that's obviously, we have to accept that that's Israel's ambitions, the Greater Israel Project. And of course, one has to look at, for example, when Netanyahu was, hurriedly, or should we say hastily, went ahead with this plan, because if one has to look at the global tide of public opinion, and it's including some Western capitals, right? It started with French President Macron, then it came to the UK, not so much the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, but if you take David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, and how vocal he's been. And of course, you take other countries like Spain and them taking a tough stance against Israel, would of course also add Canada to that. So you saw that Netanyahu, apart from his problems at home, and we all know that he's looking for every single excuse to stay out of jail. And the Gaza war and the extent to which he's taken the Gaza war has been basically he's doing to say for his political survival. And of course, without the two nutcases of the right-wing leaders that are part of his coalition that want to see make sure that he doesn't stop the war, and they also want to they're taking it to a point of making sure that Al-Aqsa is occupied and converted into what they call the promised third temple. So you have all this, but definitely with the global tide of public opinion going against the Greater Israel narrative, and today compared to say when the first Gulf War took place in 1991, when you saw the tide of public opinion. Of course, today we have access to social media, internet, alternative news sources, etc. People on the ground who can communicate using technology with us. And we're getting a far different perspective, and we're getting the truth. That's the main, most important thing. I mean, how does one explain that suddenly there's an internet blackout over Gaza just before the attacks on Iran took place? Because while he's running havoc with Iran at the moment, there's serious havoc being meted out on the people of Gaza. So yes, I think there are people waking up. You will have the people in government that will be still the yes man. And of course, how over a matter of few hours when those attacks on Iran took place, Netanyahu was able to get people to side with him already. Macron said Israel has every right to defend itself. Then you see Trump who is a flip-flop of notes, so there's no surprise there, now coming out guns blazing, a man who has no appetite for war. In fact, there's been a screenshot of his Twitter post going around from 2011 to about 2015, whereby he kept on rebuking Obama for wanting to go to war with Iran. And now, who is the person that's going to war with Iran? So you have the people in the political capitals who will be the yes men, but at the same time, civil society is waking up, academia has waken up. Of course, we've seen it with the students, and we know what the students are paying, the price they pay now, especially in the United States, for standing up. And it's just a matter of time that and Almighty Allah knows best, that the politicians realize that, you know what, they've been used.
So, Dr. Mathee, we see in the last 24 hours or so, right? Trump has made some really ridiculous statements. He wants all the citizens or the occupants of Tehran to evacuate. Then he's talking about an unconditional surrender. Excuse me. He is unpredictable in what he says, but what's your sense? Are we looking at direct US involvement?
As I said, Moulana, I mean, I can just speculate. I don't know, because as I'm not a political analyst or even security analyst, so I can't answer that question from that very particular angle. It's not within my knowledge. I don't know what will happen. We'll have to see what happens in the days coming. Inshallah, whatever happens, we hope that it happens so that the people of the region, Iran, beyond Iran, like our pains and what we carry for the people, our pain at what is happening in Gaza, because we don't want to see people dying. But to ask, could he do it? He's hallucinating. But this doesn't, for many people, say, doesn't make sense. Trump is either the businessman or then I'm just speaking very general, what I also hear on the news. However, it makes political sense for imperialism. Imperialism, its irrationality is very rational to itself. So therefore, when your question earlier to my colleague in the studio, or also on this program was that your question is that Iran must sign, Israel doesn't have to sign. Now we speak about the double standards, but that is exactly imperialism in the Western episteme, because everybody else other than so-called white Europeans who live north of the Pyrenees, they are not human beings, and therefore, and we will recall, take South Africa, take our own country. During occupation, when white racist South Africa occupied what was then called Southwest African Namibia, the same forces vetoed resolution after resolution to punish South Africa. Margaret Thatcher and the whole world used to say that it will harm black South Africans if we apply sanctions. The same people applied sanctions against Iraq that killed 500,000 Iraqis. So they may well do it. What is important, as my fellow guests also said, is that the world, we are waking up. And to your question, yes, we are waking up. The peoples of the world, alhamdulillah. And people stand up, and all these efforts happening throughout the world, this resistance, in whatever form the resistance takes, is such an important resistance. And so whatever Trump does, we are, I think, as human beings, and it's certainly there's to grow much, much more. But I think that is what is important, is that the world will resist, that the Iranians will hit back, like the people in Gaza are hitting back, like our brothers and sisters in Yemen are hitting back, and saying that, no, we will live, as Tipu Sultan said some 300 years ago, when the British attacked, and the British and the Americans are the same, and the French, they're all the same. They have different iterations here of how violent and how cruel and how dehumanizing they are. But he said, I rather live and die on my feet than live on my knees, or one day in the life of a lion is worth more than 100 years in the life of a fox or a jackal. And I think that is important. So I don't know what will happen, Moulana, at least from a political or security analysis. I think our guests will give us better insight into that, as that is my colleague's expertise. But what is important is that we hope, inshallah, that the resistance will continue, and that people will not die, because these are our mothers and our fathers and our children, and wherever they are. But the resistance will continue in whatever form.
So, Mustafa, I mean, maybe you can pick up on what Dr. Mathee was saying and give us your thoughts on, likely scenarios going forward. I heard one analyst saying yesterday that Netanyahu's exit strategy is just one, and that is Trump. And that it may likely be similar to what we saw a couple of weeks ago between India and Pakistan. You see the tit for tat, and then eventually, there's a kind of intervention of sorts, and things kind of stabilize. Others fear we could see a full-blown regional conflict. What indicators are there at the moment, Mustafa?
Well, Moulana, the thing is that right now, if you talk about diplomacy, there is definitely an effort. We all say that they're impotent, they're useless, but the Arab despotic leaders that are in between Israel and Iran, right, are nervous, and they should be nervous, right? They should be nervous, and they are trying all out to make back-channel efforts to try and stop this, because if this conflict goes into a full-scale war, definitely the entire region is going to be dragged in. And I don't think that it doesn't take rocket science to understand that. The thing is that how far Netanyahu is willing to go, well, one has to understand Netanyahu has already proven to us that he's willing to go as far as he'll go in order to maintain his political survival. In Israel, Israeli society knows that he is corrupt, that he deserves the prison cell. The courts, I mean, he's also using Stalingrad tactics with the courts. So the only time, because of the immunity which a sitting prime minister deserves while holding office, should we say, safeguards him from going to prison. But in a state of emergency like what is currently taking place, whereby now he's going and sending to the public that we are fighting a war on two fronts. One is right here in Gaza, and one is with Iran. So as long as he's maintaining this war, and as long as the US and the Europeans and other Western nations providing the arms to continue doing so, he's going to go all out. He doesn't give a damn. And the thing is that you take the villain. A villain is not a fool. A villain is generally an intelligent genius who is psycho, right? Psychotic. There's no other word for it. And this is what we see. We are seeing in our times a psychotic head of state who has got no qualms about mass murdering people in order to achieve his own gains. And I mean, you can say it's got nothing to do with concern of Iran's nuclear program. The bottom line is that Israel and the West do not want to see any Muslim country armed with nuclear, and forget that they don't want to see a Muslim country having military capability. Right? The only time they are interested in Muslim countries is when the Muslim countries open the checkbook, like what we saw recently with Trump's visit to the Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, when they open the checkbook and they give blanket orders for arms. That too, they're amassing arms. And okay, apart from those arms being used in Yemen, but where else are they going to use those arms? Right? So the thing is that we are seeing this sort of thing, and that's the danger. And what the problem is that what the Zionist lobby is so strong and so powerful, especially in the United States and the European capitals, they will make sure that as what they sell out to be Israel's interests are safeguarded and Israel's right to defend itself is being upheld. They will make sure that these leaders will do their bidding, and that's the sad reality that we are facing.
So, Dr. Mathee, early on you spoke about the imperialist, colonialist agenda, right? Is the target the Muslim world per se, or is the target something different or something broader than that?
Shukran, Moulana. I just before I come to your question, this thing about genocide, I'll try to link it to your question, inshallah. Genocide, so Netanyahu is all that, as Brother Mustafa explained, and he's psychotic. But Netanyahu is not alone. Beyond just his corruption and his scandals within the illegitimate entity called Israel, right? That is there, if you want, in a way, the internal business. But Netanyahu, we must see him as part of this Western manzuma, this Western system. And genocide, as the Jordanian scholar who teaches at Columbia said, genocide is a Western value. We must understand that. Genocide is when we look at the colonial enterprise of the last, going back to when Columbus set sail across the Atlantic and come to what he thinks to be India, and what he does to the so-called Indians of the so-called Americas. There's a genocide that takes place already. This genocide takes place from the end of the 15th century, and it continues. So Israel, Zionism, is part and is a manifestation of this value, this Western value of genocide. It is both to massacre, wipe out people. Leopold of Belgium wiped out 10 million people in the Congo, and epistemicide. And they start, of course, in Al-Andalus in 1492 with the fall of Granada, the last Muslim enclave. Now, come to your question. The Muslim world is certainly central because the Muslim world is the only one that is cheeky, if you want, that would stand up. So yes, the Muslim world is the target. Of course, it's world dominance. We can't assume that they don't want to get rid of China. Of course, they want to get rid of China. They want to get rid of elsewhere. Russians are so-called white, but Russians are not all whites are equal, but some whites are more equal than others. So it's the whites of Western Europe. And the Russians are always considered Slavs, Slavic. We will see even this with Hitler, for example, in World War II. That is why Hitler attacks the Russians. One of the things that when we see that when the Nazis capture American and British and French soldiers during World War II, they imprison them. As soon as they catch Russian soldiers, they execute them all. They don't even imprison them. So to your question again, the Muslim world is definitely the main target of it. But of course, world hegemony goes beyond the Muslim world. But we must see, because it is the Muslim world alone that can stand up and offer resistance. And that is why it's so important. Of course, as Muslims, we are alongside all other human beings. We are all the khalq of God. We are all the creation of Allah. But the Muslim world is central to that. And therefore, and coming back to a point that Mustafa made, is that I think the Muslims outside of some of the governments of that are ruling us, or parts of the Muslim world, is that there's this uprising. We have a long way to go still, but that is the hope. So yes, The target is certainly the Muslim world. Because if you control the Muslim world, and they have been controlling for some time, of course, but if you keep on controlling and you can, and they can now get Iran to fall, then they have complete control. So it is the Muslim world, but of course the fruits of conquering and of subjugating the Muslim world and conquering the Muslim world, the fruits of that is to control the whole world. And that is, they will not stop. And imperialists will not stop anyway. So Trump, however erratic his statements are, whether it changes here and there, Trump himself is not the whole of a system. Trump is only part of it. He's the product of that. And we must not just see Trump as an aberration. Biden, and going back to the American empire dream, Trump is perhaps, some would just like to call him an aberration, and that he's not like Obama, or he's not like, perhaps, but Trump is the very product of that imperial system. And the Muslim world, again, to come back to, I think, to a very important question, yes, the Muslim world is the target of that. And I speak about the Muslim world, let us say Muslims are, because Muslims are troublesome fellows, isn't it? Muslims are the savages who do not want to be civilized. Muslims are barbarians who do not want to come home and sit. Of course, it's their language, right? It's their grammar. That is why it is not simply the Muslim world as just a geographical entity, but it's those fellows, those stubborn fellows called Muslims who do not want to listen to the master, to use Malcolm X's word, who want to remain field niggers and not house niggers, like some Muslims have become. But the majority of Muslims, no, we remain stubborn, and we do not want to agree to this imperialist project. And of course, we can't agree. It would be to contradict our very deen if we agree to this civilization, as they call it, mission civilisatrice in French, to civilize us. We refuse to be civilized, and therefore we are the target.
So, Mustafa, based on what we've been discussing, right, both with yourself and Dr. Mathee, in terms of the broader agenda, the imperialist agenda here, what do you make of the debate around Iran itself? And I'm not talking about a theological debate, that's a totally separate issue. There are those who see Iran as a victim here based on what we've discussed thus far, the double standards, the unprovoked attacks, and unsubstantiated allegations, etc. And they see that defense of Iran as being necessary in terms of the overall agenda that we've been speaking about against from the imperialist side. But then there are those who bring into the equation Iran's own recent history, for example, with regards support of Bashar al-Assad and Syria. What do you make of that debate which is taking place within Muslim circles, Mustafa?
Okay, Moulana, look, the thing is that aside from Iran's involvement, especially in Syria and post-Saddam Iraq aside, which obviously has backfired, if one has to put it that way, given the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Yes, let's leave the theological side aside and look at current Iran. I mean, think of us as a South African Muslim community living in Iran today. And if we had to endure that wrath of Israel, it's not fair, right? And I use the same argument, go back 3 years to when the Ukraine war started, when Russia invaded Ukraine, that if we were that community of, like how we are South African community now, I'm not saying a South African Muslim community, but say a South African community living there, having a peaceful night's sleep, and suddenly your neighbor in the middle of the night starts attacking you. We wouldn't want to be in those positions. So yes, the double standard is obviously at play here. And the thing is that why single out one country? I mean, the thing is that there's so many other countries that are building nuclear capabilities. Why not go after them? So that's the one question to raise. The thing is that coming to the support, Zionism at the end of the day has been the biggest evil that the world has faced in the past 130 years, from the late 1800s. Ever since Theodor Herzl came up with his plan. And if you look at the wars that have been fought in the world today, World War I, World War II, there's so many other conflicts, the 3 Arab-Israeli wars, the various genocides on Gaza, including the current one, and now we've seen these attacks on Iran. Israel has got a lot of blood on its hands. And yes, Iran is guilty of supporting Bashar al-Assad and propping up his regime for the past 14 years. We know that. But at the end of the day, only a person who is not in their right mind will support Israel. We cannot support Israel. On principle, morally, no matter what, a Muslim cannot support Israel because everything about Israel, the very, like what Dr. Mathee has said, that it's an illegitimate state. The very existence of Israel is based on a lie. And hence you must have seen me on my social media posts putting the great Israelite, because that's what it is. So based on that premise of this nation state that is based on a lie, and everything they do, the entire modus operandi is based on a lie, right? And of course, their foreign policy and their wars are based on a lie. So going forward, I mean, they've got no justification whatsoever for this current war that they've started. And it's an unprovoked war, which they've started, although they like to call it a preemptive war. And of course, the Western mainstream media is repeating the narrative. But they've got no justification whatsoever, right? It was also in the midst of negotiations of what, Trump, the deal maker, tried to put together. And so, yes, I don't think that we should be supporting Israel. In fact, we cannot do so. And our support, if you don't want to support the Iranian government, that's one thing, but support the people of Iran. They do not deserve this. They certainly don't deserve this. And majority of the people are masoom. They're innocent. And at the end of the day, show compassion for your fellow humanity.
Mustafa and Dr. Mathee, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but shukran to you both for your time and for being part of the conversation. We really appreciate it.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah for having us, and also thank you to the listeners of INX. Shukran, Moulana Sulaimaan. Much appreciated.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, it's, there's so much more we could discuss with our guests, and there's so many other aspects to cover, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. Let's see what happens in the coming days. Let's continue to make dua to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for peace, for stability in the region, in all of the world, for justice and peace to prevail, for relief for those who are suffering occupation, oppression, genocide. And let's continue to make our contribution. At times, it may feel like, what difference it's going to make? These imperial powers have got a stronghold, they've got a stranglehold. Well, there's no power greater than the power of Allah. And every pharaoh has got to meet his Moses. Whether it happens in our lifetime or not, whether we are a direct cause of it happening or not, that's out of our control. Effort is in our control. And that is what we will be questioned about. Did we make the best and the most effort that we could? What happens after that is part of the divine decree and system. Until next week, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.